Sometimes what we believe to be true love is nothing more than a beautiful illusion, a fantasy so perfect that it blinds us to the betrayal lurking beneath. That's what happened to Corrine Holland, who risked everything for a love she swore would be eternal, only to discover, right on her own altar, that she'd been deceived in front of everyone. What was supposed to be the beginning of her happiness turned into a public humiliation. But what no one imagined was that this fall wouldn't mark her end, but rather the beginning of an unstoppable transformation. Amid the ashes of pain, Corrine is reborn. She discovers a hidden legacy, an unexpected fortune, and an inner strength she never knew she had. On her journey to rebuild, she will cross paths with an enigmatic man, the bearer of a secret capable of changing her outlook on love, power, and herself. Do you, Bruce Ashton, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? Do you promise to love, honor, respect, and accept her, in sickness and in health, for the rest of your lives? Corrine Holland's heart raced as she looked at Bruce expectantly, waiting for his answer. In the warm golden light filtering through the church's stained glass windows, her fiancé's white suit seemed to glow, accentuating the sophisticated features that had won her heart years before. Every line of his perfectly chiseled face, every nuance of his deep-set eyes was enhanced by that almost mystical light, reminding her why she had fallen madly in love with him from the very beginning. For 3 long years, their relationship had overcome numerous obstacles. The constant disapproval of the Ashton family, who had always considered her inferior and unworthy of the name they bore so proudly. The endless hours Bruce put into rebuilding his family's business empire, leaving her alone for weeks at a time, while he traveled the world closing deals and making connections. The condescending stares of Liaton's high society, who never ceased to treat her as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong in their privileged circle. And yet, there she was, one step away from achieving the dream she'd longed for, without the blessing of her own family, who had cut off all contact with her when she decided to unconditionally support Bruce, but with the unwavering determination of someone who has risked everything for love. But instead of the joy she expected to see reflected on her beloved's face, what she found was uncertainty and hesitation clouding his features, a flash of doubt that crossed his eyes like a fleeting lightning bolt, but intense enough to sow the seeds of fear in her heart. Before Bruce could utter a word, the heavy church doors slammed open. The sound reverberated throughout the hall like an ominous omen, causing all the guests to turn their heads simultaneously. Rita Ashton, Bruce's younger sister, staggered in, her face streaked with tears. Her carefully applied makeup had turned to black furrows on her cheeks, and her hair, perfectly styled for the occasion, now fell in messy strands around her contorted face. "Bruce," she cried, her voice broken by tears, sounding completely lost and desperate. "Something terrible has happened. Leah, she... Panic instantly gripped Corrine, and she gripped Bruce's hand tighter, feeling her heart race to an almost painful pace. That name evoked bitter memories she'd tried to push deep into her mind. Leah Burgess, Bruce's unattainable love, the woman he'd confessed one night after one too many glasses of wine, had been the only true love of his life. Years ago, when the Ashton family had hit rock bottom financially, Leah had chosen to pursue professional opportunities abroad rather than stay by Bruce's side during his darkest moments. That decision had caused him to completely cut off his relationship with her, vowing to himself that he would never forgive her for abandoning him when he needed her most. It was then that he reached out to Corrine, who had always been by his side, first as a friend and confidant and then as something more. However, about a month ago, Leah had mysteriously reappeared in Bruce's life. Corrine had noticed subtle changes in his behavior since then, calls that dropped when she entered the room, late arrivals without convincing explanations, an emotional distance that seemed to grow by the day. But she had chosen to ignore these signs, convincing herself they were simply a product of her insecurity and pre-wedding jitters. The color drained from Bruce's face as he asked, panic lacing his usually controlled voice. "What happened to Leah?" "Leah's Hemorrhaging, Rita sobbed, barely able to get the words out through her tears. The doctor says she might not survive. Without a second thought, Bruce abruptly broke free of Corrine's hand and ran for the door, moving with such urgency that he nearly knocked his sister over in the process. Corrine instinctively followed him, clutching his arm desperately when she reached him. "Bruce, you can't just leave like this," she pleaded, her voice barely audible over the rising murmur of the guests. Her body trembling, she searched his gaze, silently imploring him to reconsider. "Bruce, today is our wedding. Are you really going to leave me here?" Murmurs spread like wildfire through the crowd. Corrine could feel everyone's eyes fixed on her, looks of pity, of scorn, of morbid curiosity that pierced her like sharp blades, stripping her of all dignity. With tears threatening to spill from her eyes, she tried one last time. "Bruce, can't we at least finish the ceremony?" "Leah was hit by a car while saving my life," he replied in an icy voice, struggling to free himself from Corrine's desperate grasp. His once hesitant expression had transformed into a mask of coldness and indifference she had never seen before. "I can't abandon her right now." And then, as if he wanted to make sure he completely broke Corrine's heart, he added in a tone dripping with contempt, "Corrine, you know perfectly well that this marriage is nothing more than a transaction. You would be Mrs. Ashton only on paper, and nothing more. Don't interfere in my personal affairs." Transaction. That word continued to echo in Corrine's heart as she stared at him, trying to find in those eyes she had loved so much any trace of the man she had fallen in love with. The initial shock was slowly replaced by understanding, causing a bitter smile to appear on her face. "So that's what our marriage means to you?" he whispered, his voice sounding strangely heavy and distant to his own ears. "A transaction?" "Yes," Bruce replied without the slightest hesitation, as if he were confirming something as trivial as the weather that day. That simple word resounded in Corrine's chest like a devastating thunderclap, each beat of her heart bringing new waves of suffocating pain. 3 years of her life, 3 years of absolute dedication, reduced to a business transaction, a contract with no emotional value whatsoever. After muttering a sorry that sounded as empty as his promises, Bruce walked quickly away, letting the hollow apology float in the tense atmosphere. Frozen in place, Corrine watched him walk away with firm, determined steps, his silhouette silhouetted against the light streaming through the open church doors. The pain in her chest became unbearable, as if someone were slowly carving away at her heart with a dull, rusty knife. A chill ran through her entire body, leaving her numb, unable to move or react. The world around her seemed to have stopped, reduced to that endless moment of public humiliation and private betrayal. Memories returned naturally, as if her mind were searching for some sign she had missed, some clue that would have allowed her to foresee this devastating outcome. 3 years ago, when Bruce took over the Ashton family business, the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. Bruce's father's mismanagement had left a legacy of debt and unfavorable contracts that threatened to destroy the family wealth built over generations. Bruce had confessed then that he couldn't offer her a stable future at the moment, but he had solemnly promised to marry her as soon as the company was financially back on its feet. A promise sealed with passionate kisses and intense gazes that Corrine had mistakenly interpreted as true love. She had fervently clung to that promise, using her position and connections in the business world to help him emerge from obscurity and achieve recognition in the most exclusive circles. Her marketing strategy skills, her business acumen, and her connections in the trade press had been instrumental in the revival of the Ashton companies. All of this in the hope of speeding up the marriage and finally gaining the approval of her own family, who had never looked favorably on her relationship with Bruce. Now, reality dawned on her with merciless clarity. Their 3-year relationship had been nothing more than a business transaction for him. She had simply been a useful tool, a means to his ends, a ladder he'd used to climb the ladder and which he could now discard without regret. She realized with painful clarity that she had been the only one to experience genuine feelings in that relationship. Her years of dedication and sacrifice were reduced to nothing in the presence of Bruce's true love, who had returned opportunely when he no longer needed her. No matter how hard she tried to hold back her tears, they began to slide down her face, like silent rivers of disappointment, while violent tremors shook her body, a physical manifestation of the emotional earthquake that devastated her interior. Rita watched Corrine suffering with obvious satisfaction. The tension between them had always been palpable, but now, at Corrine's moment of greatest vulnerability, Rita had no intention of showing mercy. "Corrine," he said, his voice honeyed, barely concealing his contempt, "did you really think my brother would have chosen you, a country bumpkin with no refined upbringing, if you hadn't butted into his life at the exact moment he was most vulnerable? Know your place and leave quietly." The words hit Corrine like a whip, adding insult to injury. With a last shred of dignity, she straightened her back and replied, "The Ashton family has only been successful because of my efforts. Have you forgotten that yet?" "Stop talking nonsense," Rita exclaimed, pointing an accusatory finger at her. Her face, usually composed in an expression of studied elegance, was now twisted with contempt. "Do you think you're that important? The Ashton family would thrive even without you. You've always been expendable, and you know it perfectly well." Every word was like a dagger straight into Corrine's already wounded heart. So this was how the Ashton family viewed her contribution. As insignificant, disposable, a minor detail, in the grand scheme of their resurgence. All the days and nights she'd spent strategizing, recruiting investors, designing effective advertising campaigns, all of it discarded as if it held no value. Tracy Ashton, Bruce's mother, rose gracefully from her front row seat and walked with measured strides toward Corrine. Her face, a perfect example of expensive cosmetic surgery and exclusive dermatological care, barely concealed the contempt she felt as she declared, "Enough of this pathetic scene. Not only are you humiliating yourself, but you're also putting the Ashton family's reputation at risk. A shameful and unnecessary spectacle." Tracy then turned her attention to the guests, apologizing profusely for the unexpected event, and saying goodbye to each of them with a gentle smile that contrasted starkly with the coldness she had shown toward Corrine just seconds before. Corrine watched the crowd disperse, the faces of those who had been invited to celebrate her happiness now wearing expressions ranging from uncomfortable compassion to morbid curiosity. She understood with painful clarity that her dream wedding had been nothing more than a fantasy, an illusion built on empty promises and one-sided feelings. Why had all her love and sacrifice resulted only in rejection and humiliation? Had she made such a grave mistake by loving someone who never returned her feelings with the same intensity? Or had her mistake been believing that love could transcend social barriers, that it could be stronger than prejudice and elitism? Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks as she closed her eyes, the harsh reality settling like a crushing weight on her heart. Not only had she lost the man she loved, she'd also lost her dignity, her pride, and, apparently, the 3 most valuable years of her life. 30 minutes later, Corrine wandered alone through the deserted streets, aimlessly. She had left the church, the scene of her humiliation, behind her and now walked mechanically, her mind disconnected from her body, as if she were observing herself from a distance. The wedding dress, which had been specially designed for her and had cost a small fortune, dragged its white train along the pavement, accumulating stains and dirt with every step she took. The streets, normally bustling at that hour, seemed strangely empty, as if the entire world had withdrawn to leave her alone with her grief. Soon it began to rain, first a light drizzle that gradually turned into a torrential downpour, as if the sky itself were weeping for her, sharing her endless sorrow. In the distance, she spotted a bus stop where she could take shelter from the relentless rain. Barefoot, having abandoned her uncomfortable high heels somewhere along the way, she ran in that direction, but fate seemed determined to continue punishing her. A sharp stone cut the sole of her foot, forcing her to limp the rest of the way, leaving behind a trail of small drops of blood that the rain immediately diluted. as if trying to erase all evidence of her passage through the world. The unexpected sound of a car horn interrupted the monotonous rhythm of the rain, startling her. The moment the headlights illuminated her drenched figure, her eyes widened in terror. Her pupils dilated as she sensed the approach of death. Corrine's mind went completely blank as her feet felt rooted to the pavement. Panic had completely taken hold of her, freezing her to the spot like a living statue, unable to move despite the imminent danger. The oncoming car zoomed past her like a missile, so close she could feel the rush of air against her body. The powerful gust knocked her to the wet ground, where she lay, trembling from both fear and the bone-chilling cold. On that deserted street, under the relentless rain, the driver would probably continue on his way into the night. After all, there were no witnesses who could identify him. No one who could point an accusatory finger at him for almost hitting a desperate woman. However, fate seemed to have other plans for Corrine Holland. The roar of the engine echoed in the air as the driver made a sharp turn and stopped the vehicle just inches from where she lay, her wedding dress now a dirty, soaked rag. The passenger door opened slowly, revealing a sleek figure that contrasted dramatically with Corrine's sorry state. Custom-made black leather shoes touched the wet pavement as the man stepped out of the vehicle, opening a black umbrella that protected him from the incessant rain. "Are you okay?" Nate Hopkins asked, his deep voice echoing in the humid air like the purr of a powerful feline. Corrine looked up, absorbing the sight before her. The stranger's face seemed sculpted by a meticulous artist, sharp angles and defined lines that suggested ancestral nobility, a strong jaw that spoke of unwavering determination, and eyes that possessed a mysterious magnetism that evoked, in her distant, almost forgotten memories. That pair of eyes awakened something in his mind, a faint sense of recognition that seemed beyond his reach, like a dream from which one wakes up retaining only vague and diffuse impressions. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, her voice no more than a whisper barely audible over the constant sound of the rain. She tried to sit up, pushing herself onto her hands and knees, but a sharp pain shot through her scraped legs and injured foot, making her stagger. At that precise moment, a strong arm grabbed her waist, pulling her against a solid body that radiated security and strength. A strange coldness emanated from Nate, enveloping her like a winter breeze. It wasn't the coldness of contempt or indifference she'd felt from Bruce, but something different, something that suggested meticulous control over deeply suppressed emotions. Corrine instinctively placed her hands on his firm chest, feeling the warmth that contrasted with his apparent coldness. The conflicting sensations completely overwhelmed her. Reflexively, she tried to move away, but Nate held her more firmly, lifting her off the ground with an ease that revealed considerable strength. "What are you doing? Put me down immediately," Corrine exclaimed, her voice suddenly taking on an icy tone that mimicked the cold expression that now dominated her face. During her 3-year relationship with Bruce, they had never gone beyond holding hands in public and the occasional stolen kiss in private. The society they lived in placed a high value on decorum and appearances, and Bruce had always insisted on maintaining a respectable image in the eyes of the world. Now, this stranger's bold behavior completely unsettled her, making her feel vulnerable and exposed. Nate's steady gaze bore into hers, the authority evident in his voice as he replied, "She's hurt and needs to go to a hospital. I can walk by myself," Corrine protested, her body tense as his cool breath caressed her skin, sending involuntary shivers down her spine. "Don't move," he ordered with such firmness that he left no room for discussion, like a general giving orders to his troops. The moment Corrine settled into the passenger seat, the cold interior of the car made her sneeze violently. Without a word, Nate adjusted the temperature controls and, noticing that she was still shivering uncontrollably, gently placed his coat around her shoulders. "Try not to catch a cold," he murmured with seemingly genuine concern, surprising Corrine with this unexpected gesture of kindness. "Thank you," she replied softly. The garment retained his scent and body heat, causing Corrine's heart to race inexplicably. After the betrayal and abandonment she'd just experienced, the simple kindness of a stranger struck a chord with her, reminding her of what it felt like to be treated with even the slightest consideration. A flash of amusement crossed Nate's eyes as he noticed a faint blush tinge her cheeks. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," he said in a calm voice. Confusion immediately crossed Corrine's face. "What do you mean?" When Nate answered, his voice sounded firm and sincere. "I thank you for accepting my apology and giving me the opportunity to correct my mistake." Corrine's bewilderment increased at these words. What mistake was he talking about? What apologies was he referring to? However, she was too physically and emotionally exhausted to investigate further. They soon arrived at the nearest hospital. Despite Nate's insistence on helping her, Corrine insisted on walking on her own, her wounded pride refusing to accept any assistance other than what was strictly necessary. Nate simply accompanied her, patiently adapting to her slow and painful pace. After being seen by a doctor who cleaned and bandaged her wounds, declaring them superficial but recommending rest, Corrine was discharged. Upon leaving the office, she found Nate talking on the phone, his tall, elegant silhouette standing out against the white walls of the hospital. As soon as he saw her, he abruptly ended the conversation and approached her, extending a business card with a fluid gesture. "Here are my contact details," he said in a neutral voice. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me." "I don't need anything else," she replied politely, eager to put this strange episode behind her and retire. To lick her wounds in private. He handed the coat back to her, adding, "Here you go. I'll cover the cleaning costs." Looking at the garment she held out to him, Nate gave a faint smile. "You can keep it. You seem to need it more than I do." His words, simple as they were, touched a nerve Corrine hadn't expected. A lump suddenly formed in her throat as she tried to contain the unexpected surge of emotion that threatened to overwhelm her. She told herself that reaction was a result of the traumatic events of the day, the shock of abandonment, the physical exhaustion, and the emotional devastation. That was probably why she was so moved by the kindness of a complete stranger, a kindness that stood in stark contrast to the cruelty she had experienced hours before. "Thank you, but I really must go now," Corrine said softly, vulnerability evident in her normally controlled voice. There was unfinished business she needed to resolve, one last act of dignity she needed to perform, before finally closing this painful chapter of her life. Straightening his posture, he walked away with determined but cautious steps, heading toward the Ashton family residence. He had one final conversation to have with Bruce, a farewell that needed to happen on his own terms. Nate stood motionless in his place, watching her walk away with an indecipherable gaze that mixed curiosity, admiration, and something deeper that even he himself couldn't name. "We'll meet again," he murmured to himself, his words trailing in the hospital air but echoing with the certainty of an inevitable promise. Corrine crossed the threshold and entered what would have been her and Bruce's shared bedroom. The stillness of the room perfectly reflected her solitude. She alone would inhabit that space that night, if she chose to stay. Her gaze immediately fell on the heart-shaped balloons decorating the room, strategically placed to create a romantic atmosphere for her wedding night. Now they seemed to cruelly mock her pain, reminding her of everything that could have been and never would be. Without a second thought, she popped them one by one, the synthetic material crunching beneath her fingers like a small revenge for all the broken promises. The romantic decorations adorning the room only intensified her resentment. With methodical precision, she removed each of the objects that beautified the place. The scented candles arranged on small tables and shelves, the rose petals scattered on the carefully made bed, the strings of dim lights hanging from the ceiling. Finally, she stopped in front of a framed photograph hanging on the wall. The image captured a seemingly happy moment, Bruce and her in a